One of those letters when I was wholesaling landed at a guy's doorstep. It was for a single family, and he got the letter and he was like, I'll sell it, but only if you buy everything I own. And I'm like, well, what's everything you own? And he's like, well, this single family, that 15 unit apartment, that 23 unit apartment, and that 40 unit hotel. And we did some creative stuff and we got into it, I think for like 12% down. So like $300K down on a $2.3 million purchase.
All right. Welcome to the 0 to 100 podcast show. I'm Gabriel Hamill. I'm here with my co-host Travis Dillard and Mitchell England. We have an awesome guest today. I'm very excited to introduce Mr. Dave Pere. I'm excited about this podcast episode because I was on Dave's podcast, I think about 6 years ago. It was the second podcast, Military to Millionaire. It was the second podcast I ever did. And now all these years later, I have the honor to having Dave on our show. So David Pere, he is a Marine Corps veteran with 13 years of service, currently still in the reserves. Began his real estate journey in 2015 by house hacking his first investment, a duplex. That's how we all got started too, by house hacking. Discovered the power of cash flow and went all in on real estate investing and personal finance. In just 5 years, he transitioned from a negative net worth to becoming a millionaire, owning over 100 rental units. Very fitting for the 0 to 100 podcast show. Successfully transitioned off duty to pursue real estate full time. Documented his journey, creating a thriving community known as Military to Millionaire to support fellow service members and veterans. And he is also the author of the book, No BS Guide to Military Life. Dave Pere, welcome to the 0 to 100 podcast show.
Thanks for having me, Gabe and Travis and Mitch.
That was a badass intro.
I know. I was just thinking about, so we're all vets. I mean, I was Air Force, so you probably wouldn't count me as a vet or being in the military, but especially being a Marine. My dad was a Marine though. But I love that and I also was reading your bio. It's like, it's so textbook, man. Read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Like, take the red pill, get your mindset right, go house hack, buy a Plex. Oh my gosh, someone's paying my mortgage. Get addicted to the concepts and cash flow, and then go take down a 10 unit. I do want to talk about that 10 unit because you were in Hawaii and you bought that in Missouri, right? Like I want to talk more about that. But yeah, welcome to the show. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm in Springfield, Missouri.
All right. There you go. Are you from Missouri originally?
No, I got stuck here for 3 years as a recruiter for the Marine Corps, and it's where I started buying real estate. And then when I was getting out of the Marine Corps, cost of living here is cheap and everything else, but then also I did the whole military thing where you get divorced. And so I'm either going to live in Missouri or I'm not going to be a dad. So I figure I should be in my kid's life.
Did you have a choice to become a recruiter? Like, don't you have a choice to become a recruiter or a drill instructor? Did that happen with you?
Yeah. I mean, choice is a very, I'll give you an example of the Marine Corps' version of choice. Here's how the Marine Corps does choice. When you go to recruiter school, you get to choose where you'd like to be a recruiter. And the way they do it is pick your top 3 cities. Okay, great. Now there's 6 districts, and they say, now label the districts in preference 1 through 6. And then at the end of the day, if you get the very 6th district in the country that you wanted, they're like, well, you chose it. You're like, well, yeah, last out of 9 options. And they're like, yeah, you chose it. I'm like, fuck.
But do they say you could be a recruiter or a drill instructor?
Yeah, what happens is they do this, they call it, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's the HIST list. And it's basically like, gotcha, you fit our criteria for a billet. And then they will pick you for one specifically. And basically the game then is, can I convince the drill instructor guy why I'd be a better drill instructor fit? And maybe they'll let me change it. But once you're selected, unless you're disqualified, you're going somewhere. And I just kind of, I figured, I got picked for recruiter. I'm good at talking to people, and I'd rather do that than never sleep again like drill instructors. And boy, did I not know what I didn't know, because I had plenty of sleepless nights. And I would say drill instructor I don't want to say one's easier than the other, but they're different. They're different types of hard.
But you're nice to one, you're mean on the other. They're like,
yeah, but the one that you're mean in is like, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, exactly by the minute what you're doing all day, every day, no surprises. Whereas recruiting duty is like, we need you to find 2 males, a reservist, and a female. Have fun. And you're like, oh.
Well, I was hoping you were a drill instructor because Mitch needs discipline. I was hoping you could yell at him or something, but that's okay.
Yeah, Dave, let's get into your story a little bit, even like pre pre-military. So, I mean, you went from, military to millionaire. I mean, that is your podcast. That is your community. But I'm curious, even like pre-military, was real estate on your radar? What, pre-military, were you thinking business? Were you thinking community? Were you thinking financial freedom? Or did that come later?
Yeah, no, my mom likes to tell that she thinks she figured out I was going to be an entrepreneur when I was like 6 or 7 years old. And I decided I was going to make like 3 cat o' nine tails whips in my backyard out of like fishing line, rocks, and twigs. And then I managed to sell them to my neighbors. Like, hey, you need a whip? Here's a whip. But outside of that experience, no. I mean, I was your typical like, can I drive this car faster? Where, I didn't want to go to school. I didn't have money for school. I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, very sheltered, religious, conservative, homeschooled kid who looked like Hyde from that 70s show and had no spine. And I joined the Marine Corps to get out of town and have an adventure. And boy, it was the adventure of a lifetime.
How old were you when you joined?
I signed on my 18th birthday. My parents wouldn't. My mom likes to say that it's because she wanted to make sure the decision was mine, but they refused to sign the parental consent. So on my 18th birthday, I just didn't tell them I was going to the recruiter's office, signed the paperwork, and swore in the next week.
So did you feel like you needed direction early on? Were you like, I gotta stop making whips and I gotta go join the Marines? Or what was did you feel like you wanted that structure?
I think that was part of it. I mean, I was an Eagle Scout. I always thought I'd be like a firefighter or a cop or something. And the military is a good place. There's a lot of good stuff that comes out of it. But I think part of it was really just like, I wanted to see the world, have an adventure, and what better place to do that than in the military. And I chose the Marine Corps really because, well, I mean, you could probably say part of it was because they look the best in uniform. But I mean, realistically, I think it was because when I talked to all the different branches, my biggest question was like, where do you get stationed? And outside of like Germany and Italy, the Army is basically like Oklahoma, and then the Air Force is kind of all over the US, and the Navy's like, you might get a coastal town, but you're going to spend half the time living in a hole on a ship. And I was like, well, the Marine Corps gets coastal towns and doesn't live in ships. That sounds good.
Your uniforms do look good. My dad, like I said, is an ex-Marine, and he'd make fun of me being Air Force. He said, you guys look like you have bus driver uniforms. I guess back in the day, the Air Force uniforms were similar. So yeah.
Travis has pictures of Marines all over his walls. He loves that uniform. So
it gets a little weird. That used to be his background on the podcast. We made him change it.
We were like, hey man, you got to calm down with the Marine Corps men on the wall.
Uniforms on my wall.
I know it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Dave,
anyway,
at what point did real estate hit your radar? How many years? So you joined at 18. So when did real estate hit your radar?
I tried to buy a house when I became a recruiter, and I just realized recruiting pace was super busy and I didn't know what I didn't know. So I ended up kind of abandoning that. And then about 2 years later is when I got handed Rich Dad Poor Dad. And that was...
What year was that?
It would have been 2015. So I was 25. Yeah. Ironically, it was someone trying to get me into Amway. Didn't work, but I ended up in real estate and that was way better. So I was 25 years old. I'd spent 7 years in the Marine Corps. I had virtually nothing to show for it. I'd put, 8 to 10% of my money into my thrift savings plan, but I never had taken it out of the G fund. So it didn't earn any return. And that was, pretty much the extent. I had made all the normal service member mistakes, right? I had a Harley, I had a sports car, I had another car, I had tattoos and rifles and taking a bunch of chicks out on dates and had a bunch of booze and basically had, no money.
So Dave, I want to talk about that, like your mindset. So you did all this typical military thing, all this stuff, you bought all this stuff, you spent all your money, and then you read that book. Was it an instant aha, like shit, I need to do something differently? Or what was your mindset like pre-Rich Dad Poor Dad? And then you read that book. Was it just like a light switch and oh shit, I need to go change the direction, or where was your head at? Yeah,
pretty much. I was working like 80 hours a week as a recruiter and it was just taking a toll. And I realized, hey, I'm going to go back to the military and I don't have, like, if I decided I didn't want to do this anymore, because I was on the fence. I was like, do I want to stay in the Marine Corps or is this going to be it? Like, am I going to leave after recruiting? And on the fence, I just kind of realized I didn't have an out. If I left the military, I was going to have to take a full-time W-2 job and be somebody's, I was going to have to work for someone. And so I was looking for a way to I don't think I knew that I was looking for a way to replace my income so I could be my own boss, but that's essentially what I was looking for. And when I read that book, it was like, oh, this makes sense. This is basic math. I'm not an idiot. I could do this. And then I kind of went down the Purple Library and the Bigger Pockets rabbit hole. And I mean, it might have been maybe 4 months from reading Rich Dad Poor Dad to moving into that duplex.
Millions of people have read Rich Dad Poor Dad. And it's kind of interesting because we're all in circles with a lot of other real estate investors who have read Rich Dad Poor Dad, but they actually took action and did the thing. But you meet a lot of other people who read Rich Dad Poor Dad. They read it 20 years ago and they don't own any property at all. Right. So what was it that allowed you to read that book? And then 4 months later, kind of walk us through, you read the book, 4 months later, you actually bought a duplex and you're implementing these things that you learned.
It boiled down to that book really sparked like, I think this is doable. I'll read another book. And so I read probably 2 or 3 more Robert Kiyosaki type books. And then I found what I was doing is every time I came across a term that I didn't understand, I would just pull my phone up and Google it, which you'd be amazed how many people still don't know how to do that. And, I pull my phone up, I Google the thing. And what I realized is there was this website called Bigger Pockets that kept popping up with the answers.
What's Bigger
Pockets. Yeah, I know. No one's ever heard of it.
Yeah.
And so it was during that era where, Brandon had just come out with the book on rental property investing. So I listened to that. And then the book on buying a house with no and low money down. And between those, I kind of realized, what really happened I think the real catalyst is, it's kind of funny actually. My lease was coming up. I was living in a 2-bed, 1-bath apartment that was like $550 a month. And I was like, well, I could either renew this or I could buy a duplex, and I didn't have the money for a down payment, but I was like, if I get into a place where it's $500 or $600 a month, even if I don't have a tenant, I'm out the same amount of money I was on this apartment, but I'm sure I can get a tenant at some point. Right. And, I actually found a duplex that had a tenant. So I went from paying $550 a month to paying, $585, but with a tenant paying $475 of it. So it was an easy way to justify it to myself. But the real kicker is I was trying to figure out how to find the money for a down payment. And then I was sitting at a bar and this guy came in the bar and was like, hey, who has the Harley outside? And I'm like, me. And he's like, you might want to come outside. And this dude had been we'll say he had a drink or two, or 10. He was not walking straight, but he
had an insurance check, didn't you? And then you used that for the down payment.
This dude parked on top of my Harley and he owned a car dealership and was like, I can't afford this on the car dealership's insurance. Come by the office tomorrow and I'll cut you a check for the value of the bike. And so he cut me the check for the value of the bike. And then I went to Harley and was like, what will you give me for the rest of this? And they were like, $3,000. And so I actually, I think I sold the bike after putting 12,000 miles on it for like $1,000 less than I paid for it. And then I used that for the down payment.
Hey, David, I was looking at, so this duplex, because one of my first deals was a duplex. By the way, go check out the R1 framework and school scale. Like we always talk about 0 to something, which is like house hacking or buying a plex, live in one side. But I noticed you bought it with FHA. I'm just curious why by the way, I love duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes for beginning real estate investors because they can get FHA lending. They can get 3 or 5% down. Oftentimes you can get a 30-year amortization loan. I mean, getting the loan is a pain in the ass, but once you get it, man, so that's why we love these small multi-units because they're such a great way to get in the game with probably some of the best lending terms. But I'm curious why you didn't use the VA loan, which is like what I did for my first house, and I house hacked renting rooms out. And, it's like 0% down. I don't know. Was the rate bad or could you not get the VA loan while you're active duty?
No, none of that's the reason. The reason is actually one of the things that makes me so passionate about what I teach in my community, right? Here's the real irony. I am probably online as one of the kings of VA loans, like probably one of the leading educators and I'd say most knowledgeable people online talking about this thing. And I'll argue all day, every day with people that it is the single most valuable primary residence product in the world.
Bingo. Yeah.
I've never used it. And here's why. The very first property I bought, the lender told me, oh, you can only use the VA loan one time. Don't waste it on that property, which we all know is wrong, but I didn't know what I didn't know. So I listened to him. And then after that, the second place I moved, I was priced out and I didn't have the money for the difference to buy with the VA. The third place I moved, I got there right before they eliminated the cap on the first property. And so I was like, well, I could afford a single family in San Diego, but I don't want to do that. I want a fourplex and I was priced out of that. So I didn't buy. And then I found out really, really hard when I got out of the military that even if you own $5 or $6 or $7 million worth of real estate and you're financially free, if you write it off on your taxes, it doesn't count and you're unbankable.
Or you don't have a W-2 income. They look at you like, like you have herpes.
Second, you don't have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, David, really quick and this is actually a question for me on the VAs, because I used my VA loan to buy my first house. It was like 8.5%, by the way, in 2000, for those of you that are whining about rates. And then I sold that house, but I built equity, and then that's how I got going. Then I traded it out, bought another place, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And then since I didn't have a VA loan because I paid it off, I was able to use it again later. And I bought a condo that I rented and then sold it, took the equity and did an apartment complex. So for those of you that are listening, like that are military or ex-military, man, if you're not getting in the real estate game, shame on you without using a VA loan. Like there's no excuse for you. But can you use a VA loan to get like a 3-plex or a 4-plex, or is it just single family houses?
Yeah, up to 4 units as long as you occupy it.
Wow.
And there's no limit on your first use. And the VA will go, it's got a unlimited DTI. So I helped a guy buy a duplex in Mission Beach that was, I think he closed at a 78% back end debt to income ratio, but he had people living in his unit with him and everything else. And I mean, it was a killer deal because of the location. I mean, he lived like on Venice Beach in, Santa Monica, California.
How are rates comparing to others? Because I know like when I got a high rate when I was in 2000, but when I did that condo, I got it like at 3%. It was better rates than traditional lending. Is it usually lower or higher than like FHA products?
It's usually lower. There's a couple of reasons. One, FHA and conventional loans, the moment you add a second unit, so if you go duplex, triplex, fourplex, they automatically tack a 0.5 to 0.75 point onto the interest rate, and the VA does not. So if you go multifamily, the VA starts off lower. The other reason is with traditional lending, they have what they call loan level resets or loan level pricing adjustments. And so, if you've got an 850 credit score, 840, whatever, you're going to be the base rate. But once you get to 740, it corrects, and then at 680, and then at 640, each one of those you'll have a pricing adjustment on your loan, and the VA doesn't have its first adjustment until 640. So you could have a 645 credit score, and barring all other financial stuff, if that's the only variable, at 645, your credit score or your loan with the VA loan would be the same interest as someone with like an 820, whereas with an FHA or a conventional, you're probably closer to a full point higher.
Dave, I'm curious about kind of your journey from there. I mean, some people will buy a duplex and they stop. And I personally believe sometimes that's a mindset thing. There's a lot, they won't let their mindset get past a duplex. I mean, I hear a lot of people, I should buy a duplex. It'd be nice to buy a duplex. Maybe I'll buy a duplex. But one of our biggest focuses at 0 to 100 is scale, how to scale your real estate portfolio so you can actually achieve financial freedom and ultimately time freedom so you can live a life doing whatever the hell you want. So I'd like to go kind of dig deeper into your journey. You buy that duplex. You didn't stop there. You now have, I believe, over 100 units. Very, very fitting for this podcast show. So kind of walk us through the journey from 2 units, house hacking, to where you are today.
Yeah. My next purchase, technically my next purchase was a vacant lot, but I don't really consider that to be an investment. I mean, it ended up being a win, but it was we had a house on a 5-acre plot. My wife did when we got married, and I bought the 5 acres next to it when the neighbor decided to sell. And so we had a 10-acre plot, and really I justified that by saying, hey, we have 4 cows. If we get the second 5, we can go to 10 cows, and the cattle we sell every year will pay the mortgage. And it's
cow math.
Yeah. I mean, it actually worked. We broke even on that property every year, and we bought it for 40. And when I lost it in the divorce, it was worth 75. So, had it not been for the whole losing it in divorce part, it would have been a great
It was kind of a win.
Yeah, it was a win for her.
For her.
You're such a nice guy.
Yeah. You are such a nice guy.
But the second, like what I would consider my actual investment property, probably about 15 months later. So it took a while. I didn't have a ton of income as a single service member, so it took a while to save up. But I was mailing for duplexes, just, handwriting letters. I remember I had a 24-hour duty, and I wrote like 108 letters on yellow legal paper by hand, blue pen, typical whatever. Had writer's cramp for like a week. It was like, I'm never freaking doing this again. This better work. And then I got a couple phone calls, and none of them really panned out, which is funny because looking back, I'm like, I should have bought every single one of those properties back in 2018.
Everybody says
yeah, but the one that I did get that did pencil, this guy called me and said, yeah, I'm not interested in selling the duplex, but I have a 10 unit. and I'm looking to get rid of that. And so we started running numbers, and this was probably like, I don't even think F class is a class in real estate, but this was there.
Were you mentally prepared to buy a duplex? A 10 unit before he said that?
No, not at all. I just, you know what it was is I ran the math. I was like, you know what? Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on your podcast, but
yes, you're good.
You can edit it out. I said, don't be a bitch, Dave. You know, like just look at it.
That is literally one of our lines is just don't be a bitch, buy real estate.
There you go.
Our podcast is labeled explicit, so
Perfect.
we are in that category.
Yeah, great. We forgot to label it that, but eventually it will when we get enough listeners.
iTunes will fix it. Yeah. So I basically, that was it. I was like, well, yeah, it's a little scary, but like the numbers scale, just underwrite it and see what happens. And so it was fortunate. This was right around the time that I met our bearded friend Brandon and David Green and some of those guys, because I had been stationed on Hawaii, Scott Trench, and I kind of went to I don't know if I went to all three of them, but I went to one or two of them. And it was basically like, this is my math. Like, I'll tell anyone listening to this, like, I would not suggest you go to like a person you want as a mentor and be like, hey, look at this property. Can you help me underwrite it? Or can you underwrite it for me? But I would say anyone worth a crap, if you go and you're like, this is my math, these are my numbers, like this is exactly what I've got, I've done all the work. Can you just look at it for 2 seconds and tell me if there's a glaring red flag that I missed? Like most people will take the 2 minutes to go, oh, you forgot vacancy. Like, well, that's a big one. And that's basically what I did. I went to 2 or 3 of them and a couple other people, and I just said, did I miss anything glaringly obvious? And nobody came up with anything. So I was like, all right, well, the math on this works. And the guy's willing to, here's where it gets great. This is actually to date the best deal I've ever done. I bought this thing. He wanted $250. I got him down to like $235.
$235 for a 10-plex. Man,
like I said, it was not great. And these are, it was like 9 studios and a 2-1, and it was just not great. Yeah, not great. And then when inspections came back, I negotiated them down basically off the purchase price down to like $212,500. So I got it for $212,500. But apparently the bank missed the memo on the redux in purchase price on the inspection. And so it's kind of interesting. The guy was going to carry 10% back as a seller carry, and I was going to put 10% down. And we showed up to closing, and the bank was like, oh, we missed that memo. Well, we can either push closing a week while we go rerun everything at the new price, or you can just take this check. And I was like, what does that mean for me?
No, I don't want the check. Well, rewrite the whole thing. Yep, I don't want it.
Yeah, they were like, well, this means that you need to go to the bank and get a smaller check for a down payment. And I was like, oh, all right. So I got into this place for 4.9% down. I think it was $10,990 and some change.
Yes, and, for a 10 unit. I love
Unreal.
it. Love it.
I was just gonna say, and then 4 years to the day later, I sold it. I bought it at $212,500 and I sold it at $340. And it cash flowed around $300 to $500 a month for the first year and a half, and then around $500 to $1,000 for the last 2 years. So it probably made me around 30 grand, 25, 30 grand in cash flow. And then I sold it for 125,000 more than I paid for it.
So 150 upside in a $10,000 investment. So 15X over a couple years.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time. People talk in returns, man. If you start thinking in multiples like that, 10 grand in and 15X back. So, okay. When I was reading your bio on this 10plex, you did this while you were in Hawaii. And you were looking for properties in Missouri. And so first of all, why Missouri? And man, what a mindset. Like when I was in the military, I wasn't thinking about lettering people like 4,000, 5,000 miles away. Like why Missouri? Like that takes a lot of balls just to do it and then buy something that's probably a bit distressed. So my question to you is why Missouri? What was your mindset around that? How are you not terrified? And then how terrified were you when you closed? Because now you have an F-class asset 5,000 miles away. And then was there some value add to it? Well,
I was incredibly optimistic because I didn't know what I didn't know. And at the time I had convinced myself it was like a C minus, maybe a D plus.
It's not so bad.
Not a total war zone. But the reason for Missouri was that's where my duplex was. That's where I'd bought the first place. And when I moved out, I had interviewed property managers and I felt really comfortable with mine. So I was like, well, I have an agent. I have a property manager. I have a lender. I kind of have a team there. And when I moved to Hawaii, it would have been one thing if I moved from Missouri and I got in I ended up in like San Antonio. I would have been like, well, I could probably invest here. But when you move to Kailua or Kaneohe Bay and Kailua, Hawaii, where you're looking at a 1,600 square foot 1.5 for, $1.1 million. You're like, I could buy an apartment complex for that in Missouri. I think I'll figure this out.
Yeah, well, there's a huge superpower to being able to buy and operate assets anywhere in the country because, like we always say this, there's different cash flow fundamentals and there's also different landlord-friendly laws in different states. So once you can figure out how to do that, that's a value. And I also know, like, when I was in the military, I'd get off work and everybody's just playing video games all day long. Like, and I thought I'm going to go to college because I thought that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the military. But you didn't. Like, you're out there. Like, what did your friends say to you? Like, wait, David, you're what? You're buying a 10-plex in Missouri? What in the absolute hell are you doing? And did they try and talk you out of it, or did you just keep it to yourself?
They kind of just talked shit like I was the crazy guy, especially when I started the brand. I had a gunny who he was a real piece of work. I'm tempted to name him just because
they always try and hold you down, man. I had a master sergeant that told me, I hate these.
Yeah, he would be like, "Oh, millionaire, huh? Look at me, I'm Dave." And I was like, "Well, it's documenting the journey. I'm not." And then and then he got passed over a bunch for promotion and ultimately kicked out of the Marine Corps, I think, and I made it to millionaire. So
fuck that guy.
I told my master sergeant, someday you'll work for me. He didn't like that. So
funny enough, I actually got, we call them fitness reports in the Marine Corps, but promotion reports that got marked down. And when I asked why, like I had one, and I'll never forget, and I will name Major Dave Merles. I was his number one, like three reports in a row. And then I dropped and I was like, wait a minute. I took the gunny's job and led the battalion, like the entire regiment, to cold weather training in another state in a billet that isn't even my MOS. And we succeeded. And I came back and I got dropped. Like, I'm like, I took my boss's job and went to another state leading a logistics movement that's not in my realm of expertise. How did I go down? And the answer he gave me was, well, I don't know how, basically it was the effect of like, I don't know how motivated you can be or how dedicated to the Marine Corps when you're focusing on this other thing in your spare time. And I just looked at him and I was like, would you rather me just get drunk and play Call of Duty like all my peers? Because I feel like this is a better use of my time. And then I basically got told, deal with it. And that was it. And I had 2 or 3 all majors and lieutenant colonels who I think were, I don't know if they were intimidated by the fact that, well, the last lieutenant colonel knew that I was making more money out of the military than they were making in.
Did that drive you more? Like, did you have the attitude of like, fuck these guys, like I'm doing this now, I'm really gonna not just show myself, but like kind of that chip on the shoulder attitude of like, yeah, I'm gonna prove that I can do this.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you this, it's funny. My platoon commander at the time, Major Craigholm, and I are like best friends now. Like he is in my mastermind group. He's building a business. And it's funny because we laugh about it. I'm like, remember when this guy gave me a shit fit rep because I was doing this? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, fuck that guy.
I think that it goes to show like anytime you're thinking outside of the box, like I owned no real estate when I got deployed. I was living in a friend's attic for $100 a month. I mean, you know the story, Dave. And like, yeah. They were mostly friends of mine, but they'd make fun of me. They're like, you're living in an attic for $100 a month. What gives you the right to go build a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio? And it was mostly, out of fun, just like giving me shit. Right. But it's interesting. Anytime I think someone kind of goes outside of the lines, draws outside of the lines, or, goes outside of this box of go to school, get a job, work forever and listen to what your boss tells you, like you're going to have people question you and potentially hating you and, saying things until you become successful. And then they're curious, right? Then they're like, hey, Dave, how did you do that? Well, that shit you were talking about 10 years ago, I'm a little bit interested now.
Yeah, exactly. And then they just assume it's easy because they saw you do it. And you're like, no.
You're like, I started a long time ago when you were making fun of me. Yeah.
So you didn't stop at the 10-plex either. So continue your journey.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. After the 10 unit, I kind of scaled back. I bought a duplex next. Actually, no, that's wrong. There's a whole segment in there where I bought a building I never should have that was like a 40 unit mixed use commercial building. And I got into like a 4-year lawsuit. There's a Bigger Pockets episode where we really deep dive it. But basically, I fell into a lease option scam where the guy sold me a Corvette and then gave me the keys to a Honda Civic. And I got into a 4-year lawsuit over that property, got all my money back, plus interest, plus attorney fees, plus whatever. learned a ton. But while that was going on, I was like, maybe I shouldn't have gone so big so fast. So I went back to like singles and duplexes and actually started wholesaling for a little while. And I would, I'd wholesale 3 or 4 deals, then I'd keep one, and I'd wholesale 3 or 4 deals and I'd keep one. And I'd just kind of do the burr strategy. So I probably did like 15 burrs and like 60, 70 wholesale transactions. And then one of those letters that when I was wholesaling landed at a guy's doorstep who it was for a single family, and he got the letter and he was like, I'll sell it, but only if you buy everything I own. And I'm like, well, what's everything you own? And he's like, well, this single family, that 15 unit apartment, that 23 unit apartment, and that 40 unit hotel. And we did some creative stuff and we got into it, I think for like, I don't know, like 12% down. So like $300K down on a $2.3 million purchase.
I'm seeing a pattern here. You try to buy a single family and you end up with 10 units. You try to buy another single family, you end up with 15 units. I mean, or more. This is going well. This is a great strategy for you.
This is like you, Gabe, where you're telling everybody what you're looking for. Like lettering people and telling people you're buying also tells people you don't know what you're looking for. And if you're not having the conversations, you'll never know. So I love that.
So how many units and properties did you buy from this guy?
79 doors, 4 properties.
Wow. This is why the wholesale model is really cool, by the way, because you're able to, provide enough to put food on your table, but you're getting yourself into these deals that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. I love this. So you were trying to buy a single family and you bought 75, you said?
79. It was, we did a lease option for some of it and we did just straight purchase on the rest. But we actually, since then, we sold the single family immediately. We sold 2 of the apartments this year, both on seller carry. One already paid us back and the other just got an appraisal and should pay us back in the next like month or 2.
Can you tell us what that conversation looked like when he called and said, hey, I got your letter about the single family. I would love you to buy everything. Was you just kind of share that conversation? Because I think we have people listening where they're starting to do the work. Like we have people in our elite mastermind where, they're looking at a lot of deals, they're analyzing deals, they're sending letters, they're making calls. And it's likely that something like this at some point is going to happen, right? Where they get that phone call, they make that connection and someone says, hey, I want to sell you my entire portfolio. So I'm curious to the conversation piece and then how you kind of took that all the way to closing.
Yeah, the first thing I would say is the gut reaction when you get that call is, well, that's not what I'm looking for. But I would encourage everyone to just feel it out, like at least get the numbers from the guy. Because you never know. Some of these guys will sell things on really, whether it's creative or not, they'll sell really good deals. If it's easier to exit 4 properties at once than it is to exit 3 different asset classes over 4 properties over 4 transactions. And especially if there's no agent involved, when you get to a $2 million purchase price, a 6% commission gets expensive. Mm-hmm. And so basically the first conversation was him calling me and trying to figure out if I was legit or just some scammy wholesaler guy who didn't know what he was doing. So he's like, well, what do you own? Tell me about your story. Like, who are you? And so I was like, well, I'm in the military. I do this, I own this. At the time, I think I probably owned like 20 doors, nothing crazy, but I'd been doing it. And I'd been, at that point, I'm like, well, I've done 40 wholesale transactions. I own 20 doors. I have this community. Here's some links. Check me out. If you're interested, please send the information here and then we can hop on a call. And so he sent me all his P&L stuff and what he was asking. And we probably talked 4 or 5 times over the next month, on my lunch breaks, just sitting in my car because I worked out of a skiff. So I didn't even have a phone in my office. And then when it got close and I was like, this actually looks like it has legs, I called a friend and I was like, hey man, can you and your partner go walk this property for me? Like I'd love for one of you to tag along with my property manager, walk these properties and just tell me, am I being sold a bill of goods? And one of the guys who walked it basically called me and was like, if you don't buy this, you're an idiot. And then come to find out, like down the road, I was like, oh, I'm going to need $300,000 to buy this. I only have 100 currently. My roommate ironically had 100 and he was a VA lender at the time in 2020, 2021. So he was doing very well. And then this guy, I called him and I was like, hey, you know how you said I'd be an idiot if I didn't buy it? He's like, yeah. I was like, well, if you want in, it's $100,000. We'll go 33.
I thought you were going to say you'd be an idiot not to go in thirds with me.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So we all partnered on it. We put 300 in. We sold everything but the hotel so far. We've probably pulled around, well, by the time this last refi goes through and we get our money out of that 100% financed sale, we'll be right around 600 back out of it. and we still own the hotel, which is the hotel's a bittersweet. Ironically, I've bought more hotels since then.
I want to know more about that because we have a hotel that we're trying to sell. So maybe
yeah, Dave, they'll sell it to you 100% financing, 3% interest, amortized over 50 years.
And we got to pay Gabe a commission now, apparently. Or something.
That's right. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, this one, we overpaid on this one, and this one's been a real nightmare because we just didn't know what we didn't know. So this hotel's not been great. We're gonna make money on the sale, but we're not really. We've probably put $300,000 into CapEx, and it's just been a headache. But it's also, it's doing okay. Like it holds it stays afloat on its own, but it'll be nice to exit that one and take a check. And then so that was kind of when I exited the military. I had those 3 apartments, the hotel. I had a small ownership percentage in an RV park where I basically had a guy who had an incredible RV park, needed money, and had a friend who had money and wanted to invest in something like that. I put them together. They gave me 10% equity. I also signed on the loan because a lot of my friends are not bankable, and my bank, I'm not either, but my bank just looks at my global cash flow and says yes, because they're like, he's good.
Wait, a banker with common sense?
It's a portfolio lender. My banker will run circles around anybody.
We might want.
We need your contact.
We've got a portfolio that we're refinancing in Florida. We need to get your banker's contact.
I don't think it lends outside the area.
We need to do it before the hurricane hits too, which is a couple hours. So
dude, don't say that, Mitch. Come on, don't say that.
Perfect. It's hitting the other side.
Yeah, they're pretty local. Like they don't lend a lot of places, but he goes 85% loan to value on everything I've ever bought. And
I'm sorry, it comes down to contacts, man. Contacts, who you know. What are those relationships? Makes the world a difference.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to touch on. Like how important, we talk a lot about relationships. I've built my entire real estate portfolio through building relationships, having conversations. How important has you building a community, you having the podcast? I mean, that's how we met. I mean, I think you probably listened to my Bigger Pockets podcast episode, and then you were the second podcast I was ever on. I mean, we connected. I thought it was cool that you were really helping, service members, because that was kind of my journey, like military to millionaire, and so I guess how big of a role has that played, building that community and connecting, people to your world, but also connecting each other, other people in your community to each other's world. How has that kind of played out in your life and people in your community?
It's been huge. If you asked me today, if I had to choose between losing all my real estate and starting from scratch or losing my brand and starting from scratch there, I would ditch my real estate and start with the brand. Because it is,
I love that.
It is enabled and opened so many doors. It's the reason I've got this 0 down storage facility I'm walking right now. It's the reason we're under contract right now on another like a little 17 unit bed and breakfast in a beautiful area that I'm going to get a chunk of equity for like raising capital with. Right. So it's allowed me to trade essentially contacts for value in a way that real estate doesn't. And I mean, shoot, Gabe, this first, I'm not going to name any numbers or anything, but I had a buddy who needed a bridge loan to close a gap. And Gabe was the guy who saved the day. And that was not a small feat. And, I was able to help. So like the ability to help a friend solve a problem and everybody wins is probably my favorite thing in the real estate game.
Yeah. And the reason I was willing to do that was because of the relationship I have with you and you had with him. Right. And so it was kind of a very interesting lending dynamic, but it made sense for everybody involved. Why do you think, I get the impression, like, because I talk a lot about relationships, you do too, Travis and Mitch do as well. But I feel like a lot of people in the real estate world still kind of shy away from the importance of that and want to focus so much on the transactional piece. And I actually think the transactional, and tell me if you agree, I think the transactional piece of real estate is like the easy part. And people spend more time on the transactional piece versus the relationship and almost don't buy into the reality that building genuine relationships can lead to amazing opportunities.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100%.
Well, it's an intangible. It's hard to measure, right? You can measure a property you take down. It's hard to measure relationships or the benefits from those. But, inside of 0 to 100 and inside of Elite, specifically our mastermind, we talk a lot about like thought leadership, like not only like building relationships from going to a meetup or being a part of 0 to 100 or millionaire or Military Millionaire, but like also like, what are you leading? You know, you lead a podcast, you have a book, you have like drawing people toward you. And not a lot of people talk about this, but like the value of that, creating something that's yours, I think is just incredible. I mean, I look at 0 to 100, what it's done for us so far. It's hard to measure, right? But like, I'm sort of where you are. I'm like, man, the real estate's, yeah, it's valuable, but like the brand, it's so important. So,
well, the brand and the thought leadership. I mean, I think Dave, you've just knocked out of the park with a thought leadership. Kind of like what you said in those early years. You said, I'm just documenting my journey. I'm not talking at people
which is so cool.
And a lot of people think that they need, look, I will become a thought leader when I've achieved, when I've arrived, when I have the 100 units. And Mitch and I were like we always talk about we started writing the 0 to 100 book when we didn't have 100 units. You were documenting your journey on the way. It's the person that's saying like, hey, I made this mistake, or I had this success, or I learned this thing today and I'm excited about it and I'm passionate about it. You become the thought leader. And I love it that you said your friends were like, oh, that's bullshit. And by the way, man, like, surround yourself with people that are doing what you want to do and have accomplished what you want to do. You know, eagles want to fly with eagles. They don't fly around with buzzards. And when you're like, you said that in the military, I had friends that I still love dearly, but like, what are you doing? Don't do it. Get a job. Like, get away from those freaking people and they were making fun of you because you're documenting the journey. It's like, fuck you, man. Like, maybe someday you'll work for me. Probably not, because I would never hire you.
It's the herd though. When you leave the herd gets mad. The herd gets jealous. The herd, you know, there's some sort of reaction. Literally, when you leave the herd, there's always that pushback. I mean, I think I still feel it in my life today among even family and friends where they're going, oh, well, it must be nice to go travel to, you know, Europe for a month. It must be like, there's a little bit of that, like, you're right, not playing the same game, right?
Good
yeah.
work.
So anyway,
Dave, I agree. And it would be so easy to look at, like we talked this storage facility. I literally walked it, 3 hours ago, and it would be so easy to go, hey, this is a cool transaction and this happened because of, whatever. But like the reality is the guy who called me when he wanted to offload this, and he owns 4 facilities, and it's just, he makes roughly the same cash flow for all 4. This one takes more of his time. So he's like, you know what, if I get rid of this one, I'll be better off time wise. And he does well. He's a guy I met 4 or 5 years ago. He's my go-to real estate agent. He and I actually co-host an investor club locally together now. Like, this is a relationship I've cultivated forever. And the only time I've ever mentioned anything about doing a deal with him was, he does a ton of self-storage. And I was like, if you ever find a facility that meets your buy box but isn't big enough, call me. Like, I want to get into this asset class and I trust your judgment. So if you're like, this is one I would buy, but it's just not big enough for me, then please let me know and I'll jump in on it. And so he literally picked up the phone and was like, I'm going to exit this. This is what I'm thinking. I'll carry your down payment. Let's meet at the property on Tuesday and walk it. I'm like, okay. And that was, so there's a chance I get into this 0 down.
I love that. I think everyone needs to go back and listen to just that piece again, because what you did is you told him what you're looking. Now, you already built a relationship, but you said, here's what I'm looking for. And it's amazing how many people I will tell. Just start telling people what you're looking for. And once they start talking about real estate, they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea my neighbor owned 10 duplexes. I had no idea this woman I worked with had an entire real estate portfolio. But you're willing to open your mouth and say, hey, if you ever come across something a little too small for you, let me know. I'm interested. And then that popped up and he knew that you were interested.
David, what do you have now? What's your portfolio look like? You mentioned that you bought some more hotels. I kind of want to dig in on that a little bit, because we don't talk a lot about hotels because we like specific asset classes in 0 to 100. We're always looking for outsized cash flow returns. Obviously, we like mobile home parks. We like, self-storage. We like multifamily. We don't talk a lot about hotels. I also we tell people stay in your lane, because like Mitch and I, we scaled and achieved what we call R1, retirement number 1, through mobile home parks. And they're like, oh, we know what we're doing. Let's go buy a motel. Dumbass. Like, what were we thinking? So I'm curious.
A motel is a business for sure.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. And the CapEx and you mentioned like everything we do, we look through the lens of time. We tell people like, yeah, you can make $1 million there, but you're going to spend 1 million hours. Like, what's the point? You're going to own a job. So tell us about your portfolio today, and then elaborate a little bit more on what you're doing around hotels, because you mentioned a bed and breakfast, and maybe you can talk about that and how that fits into your investing portfolio and your strategy.
Yeah, I'm going to mess this up because I've like sold things and bought things and all kinds of whatever this year, but I think I'm around 3 duplexes and like probably 19 or 20 single family houses that, I own a controlling interest in. And then I've got, actually it's interesting. So the hotel still, the 40 unit hotel. And then we actually just signed the contract yesterday to sell the RV park. So I guess that's not technically in my portfolio anymore. It's just, we're carrying the note on it for the next 2 years. So, and there's another apartment that I still carry the note on. I've got 2 vacant lots that I carry the note on. And then this year we bought 9 tax liens. So I've got those, but we don't collect on those until next year, unless, assuming that they don't pay back. So that's kind of like the personal, like controlling interest, whatever. And then I've got 12.5 ownership stake in a hotel right outside of the Smoky Mountains in a town called Townsend. And then I've got probably another 7 or 8 apartment complexes that I kind of helped raise for a little bit through the brand. So really small ownership on those, like not even worth mentioning. And then under contract on a hotel in like a bed and breakfast in Julian, California that, I'll probably end up with like 25% of that one. And then the self-storage facility, if we buy it, I'll be 50-50 on that one. But I mean, it's interesting because like this year, right? So in December, we bought a 130 unit, 8 building hotel in Tennessee. And then I bought a duplex, a 13 single family portfolio, and I guess really we'll call it the self-storage facility. And I haven't they've all been one way or another 0 down. And then I'm not the operator on any of them. So my time, when you talk time, like you're right, that hotel, like we're doing a $3.3 million renovation on that hotel, but I have a boots on the ground guy. I trust this dude. He's on his 6th hotel. We've done a bunch of deals together. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I'm kind of trying to get to that place.
It's a phenomenal diversified portfolio within real estate, which is awesome. I also love that you look at it through the lens of time, because that's something that we talk a lot about. And I feel like a lot of real estate investors, even a lot of people, Dave, that we both know, it's like they got into real estate for financial freedom, for that time freedom piece. And they end up in projects that take them so far away from actually living that life they desire.
They're just strapped.
So, yeah, I love that you look through the lens of time.
We say this all the time, dude. Time is the new currency of the rich. It used to be, I work 20 hours, but I've got Ferraris and supermodels and yachts, and it's like now people like experiences, and time is the new currency of the rich. So,
Dave, what question do you get asked the most? And also, what question do you wish that you got asked more?
Well, the questions I get asked the most are all VA loan related, right? Because it's vets who are, they heard usually what it boils down to, and I'll kind of give the cop out answer on this. Usually what it boils down to is they heard something that's not true from an agent or a lender telling them they can't do something. And unfortunately, the problem with the VA loan is not just that vets don't really know what they don't know. The problem is that a licensed agent or a licensed lender who can do the VA loan but isn't savvy with it will take the commission and talk you out of using the VA loan rather than telling you to go talk to someone who understands it. And so
that sucks.
Yeah, it's brutal because people call me. They're like, my lender said you can't do this. I'm like, did you ask them? So this is for anyone listening. If you're a vet, you're going to use a VA loan. If a lender tells you you cannot do X with a VA loan, the only question you need to ask is, can you show me where that is in the guidelines? And if it's not something they can show you in the guidelines, then it's an overlay from the lender. Go ask another lender because the VA loan has so few restrictions. What question do I wish I got asked more? Hey, Dave, I got $100,000. Do you have somewhere I can put it? No.
I thought you were going to say, hey, Dave, why are you so damn good looking?
Hey, Dave, how do I get a beard that looks like that?
That's the question I probably get. Realistically, the question I probably get asked the most lately is, has anyone told you look like Jason Kelsey? Like, yeah.
Oh my God. You're right. You do look like Jason. Right when you said that, it was like click for me. That's a great beard, by the way.
So much lately. It's ridiculous.
They've got a podcast. Maybe they'll come on the show.
They do.
And
he's like my spirit animal.
He is your spirit animal.
Dude,
He's your big brother.
He started on the end. He's an NFL commentator now, and they showed him on the Chiefs game yesterday. The three guys with him are in like full suits with like Gucci, everything. And he's in black jeans, a button up with like a gray button up with his sleeves rolled up, and tennis shoes.
Well, you watched the documentary
That's
on
awesome.
him, and like
I did not yet. But
they go watch it. You go to their house, and it's just a effing disaster. Like it's just a mess. And the guy's just like he's looking around. He's like, I'm looking for my Super Bowl ring. He's like looking in cabinets and under
just a disaster.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's me.
He seems like a cool guy.
Yeah, super down to earth. So, hey, talk about your book a little bit, Dave. I want to know more about that. The No BS Guide to Military Life: How to Build Wealth, Get Promoted, and Achieve Greatness.
It's catchy. I basically just wanted to write a book that would answer. Basically, it would be everything that I wish I'd known when I joined the military. So it is not a one-stop shop financial freedom, although realistically, I guess it could be, but it's not just that, I should say. Like it covers, like chronological order. Like if you join the military today, here's what to do with your thrift savings plan. Here's what to do with like picking a job. Here's, recruiter versus drill instructor type decisions. I mean, it kind of talks through like life in the military, and then it talks through your benefits in general, college stuff, transitioning out of the military, when to start looking at exiting and different ways to exit, whether you should do the reserves or not. Documenting your stuff for the VA disability and how to get your disability approved and everything. Because let's be real, we're all vets. There is no better passive income than having a disability check from the VA. Like there's nothing.
And document your shit while you're in. Like while you're in, you hurt yourself. I didn't do any of that. I'm like, I'm fine.
Yeah. I always tell people, I'm like, look, I'm not an advocate for gaming the game and pretending you got hurt.
Talk about our CEO at Cadia, on our investment group, Cadia Capital Group. She's all spun up on tax liens right now. She went to like this course and she's like learning about it. And you mentioned tax liens. Could you tell us and our listeners a little bit about that strategy and how that works?
Yeah, it's hard to get. I'll preface with this. It is going to be different, not only state by state, but county by county. And so every county is different. Every state is different. And so you really got to do your local research. And some of the weird things are like, in order to bid on a tax lien, at least in my state, you have to have a driver's license, like a state ID from that state, or be standing next to somebody who is like, you can't just.
What if you're a convicted felon like Mitch? Can you not do it? Or
not convicted, not convicted.
I don't think that matters. I don't know for sure. I don't know that matters. You have to be a resident. And so like, I couldn't just go to the August, Missouri tax lien sale, then drive down to Arkansas and do theirs, then drive over to Oklahoma, then drive to Texas. And the crappy thing about that is in Missouri, the tax lien's on the same day, countywide or statewide. And so basically like there's three of my friends and we will kind of go to three different counties, but we try to stay out of the biggest city because that's got some actual competition. And so like what we do is there's this town about an hour and 15 minutes northwest of us. And one of my buddies owns a lot of real estate up there. And so we'll just we'll pull $20,000, $30,000 together between the three of us and he'll go to the auction. We do all our homework. And so it's basically, you pull the list of people that are delinquent. You can't go in the properties, but you can drive by. And so you want to make sure there's a physical structure on each site if you're going to bid on it, or at least that kind of what you're getting at. You pick, 10, 15, 20 properties that you'd be okay winning. And basically the way it works is, let's say that their back taxes are $1,000. That's where the bid starts. If you pay $2,000 for the auction, like if that's where you win, then you bought the tax lien for $2,000 and they pay you, I think right now it's 10% interest on in order to pay it back, but you only get paid interest on what their back taxes were. So if you bid $2,000 and the lien was $1,000, they'll pay 10% on the $1,000 and then your other $1,000 you get nothing on. If they pay you back in that year, then you get the interest and you're done. And if they do not, then there's a couple different steps as far as like sending notices and letters and whatever, but you take possession. And so, for example, we got 8 houses and 3 vacant lots this year for like $16,500. And we anticipate we'll probably end up getting paid back on, 7 of those and probably get to keep 1 or 2 houses in 1 lot.
So it's like an asymmetric bet, meaning on that example, I gave you $2,000. I got a little interest on $1,000, maybe $100, few $100. They paid me back. I lost money on that. But so it's a very minimal downside. But the upside is I just took down a $60,000, $70,000, $100,000 house. If I, and my question is, if someone only owes like $1,000 in back taxes, why would they let a $70,000 house go? Is it like, how does that happen?
And it's actually not asymmetric with a loss. Like they still have to pay you the overage. They just don't pay interest on it. So if you put $2,000 into that, they might pay you $2,100 back. So you don't lose. There's no way you lose on it. But yeah, there is a potential upside. I guess I should rephrase that. We bought a lot that we thought was a different lot. And so we paid $1,800 for a lot 3 years ago. That is basically a cinder block shell of a house, and we can't do anything with it. So, I mean, we could demo it and build there and we'd still win. Like you're $1,800 into a lot. Like it's not terrible.
Can you just sell the lot for $10,000?
Yeah. Yeah. So we've actually tried to owner finance it a couple times. And so we've probably made our money back on it already, but we can't, everybody always gives it back. So, there's a couple reasons on the vacant lots. A lot of times it's just somebody who doesn't care about the property and lets it just go. They just would rather just lose it. But on the single families, a lot of times it's just people who, they either don't realize or maybe they passed away or there's a lot of odd things. Like my buddy bought a house once. This is crazy. This is the craziest tax lien story I've ever heard. And this is one of my partners. This was actually when I decided I was going to get into tax liens on the next year. So when they went through the whole auction day, and at the end, they're like, all right, thank you. And then they were like, oh, shoot. Hey, we had 2 properties that didn't go last year and didn't go this year. So we're going to sell them right now and you can take possession tomorrow. And nobody else turned around. Marty was like the only one who cared. And he bought 2 houses for $90 each.
What the hell?
$90 a piece. He went to the house the next day.
Jeez.
And he knocks on the door and he's like, hey, you guys didn't pay taxes 3 years in a row, so I own this property now. And the guy's like, this is my dad's house. And he's like, well, here's my number. Tell your dad to call me. And the dad calls him and he's like, oh, like, I don't know if it was a divorce thing or whatever. Like the guy just had no idea that he was back on taxes. And so the guy's like, well, how much for the house? And Marty goes, $25,000. And the dude was like, okay, can I make payments? And so he has been paying my friend for 3.5-4 years now, $300 a month on this house that my buddy paid $90 for.
Easy.
What's a good check on that?
Obscene.
Yeah,
300% a month.
We're going to have to edit this part of the show out because I don't know if I want people to learn about this tax lien thing.
Tax liens are definitely gaining some, they're gaining some popularity.
Yeah.
It's like when I will say there's about mobile home parks. You're like,
I remember going to some like free run of the class, run to the back of the classroom, learn about tax lien seminars back in the day that were in little hotel rooms.
They're crazy, but I will tell you this, and I will tell anyone listening to this, this is not a beginner strategy because you're not going to see your money for a year. And even then you might not get a house. So don't lock your capital up for a year. Don't, you run the risk of like, you've never been in this house. So you run the risk of buying yourself a sucking chest wound that you tied capital up for a year. And now you're stuck on a property that like, there is definitely that side of it. I just think, like you said, it's an asymmetric bet, right? Like over the long term, you are going to win in this strategy if you don't overbid, but you definitely should be like a small piece of I would treat it like crypto, like small piece of your like volatile piece of your portfolio, not your main strategy, but that's just me.
Dave, we have one final question that we ask all our guests. And I'm curious if you were to lose everything today, your net worth and your network, all your real estate, all your contacts, you're sitting on your friend's couch if you have any friends left,
eating Cheetos,
maybe eating Cheetos. What's the first thing you do? What do you do, that first day, that first week, that first month?
Obviously, I assume that I lose my brand too. So
yeah, we're going to say you lose your brand. We used to give people their network and it was just too easy.
We got to take it away. Yeah.
Do I get to talk about the experience that I have?
YouTube still exists. The podcast world still exists, but yours is gone. You don't have the brand.
If I get to talk about the experience I have, the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to get a killer W-2. Because as much as I would talk about financial freedom and time freedom and this, that, and the other, the stuff that I've learned over the years, I mean, I could say like, I'm going to go build my own business and that would be great. But the easy button is I know that with my experience, I could walk into a $200,000 or $300,000 job right now, and there's no single better point of leverage for like starting real estate than being bankable and having a really good W-2. And as much as the goal is like getting out of the rat race as fast as possible, I think if you took a $300,000 job at Amazon for 3 or 4 years and you played your cards right with that cash, that'd be it.
You're going back into, FHA, plexes, going back into doing
all of those options are available again, whereas they're not right now for me. So yeah.
Awesome, Dave. It's been awesome. Awesome having you on. If you have a few extra minutes, we'd love for you to stay on with our elite members. It's one of many benefits that our elites get is to stay on with our guests and ask some direct questions. So far, we've had no guests say no. So hopefully you're not the first one to say, fuck those guys.
I love the pressure. No pressure at all, but
awesome.
All the good people said yes. There's been nobody.
Yeah. So what's your answer, Dave?
So it's a yes. Yeah. Awesome. So
okay, great.
Yeah. So we'll give you the instructions because you jump over to the Zoom call for our elites. But man, thank you so much for joining the 0 to 100 podcast. And anything we can do in return, come on your show, whatever we can do. I'd love to collaborate more with you between 0 to 100 and what you're doing. I think there's so many similarities, and us being all vets, and even Mitch was an officer.
Even Mitch.
Yeah. Anyway, man.
Says the Air Force guy.
Yeah. Says the Air Force guy. Right?
Says the Air Force guy. Thank you, Dave. You know what?
Right.
Let's stick together.
Touche, man. Touche. Awesome, man. Thanks again, David.